For course, of course, this unexpected escalation is unbalancing a lot of calculations that has been settled over the last few years in Syria, especially under the Turkish Russian understandings about the situation in the north of Syria. These moves were sudden and astonishing, and it used a huge amount of weaponry and a huge number of people from the armed factions in the north of Syria. It's not a haphazard attack. It is a very coordinated attack that has been prepared for a while, and it has been orchestrated for a while. So it happens while there is a very pressing regional situation, especially with the situation in Lebanon and in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East. So these moves maybe indicate that the upcoming map of escalation will be involving Syria, will be the Syrian map of escalation, especially that these moves might lead to more escalation, more tension, and might lead to more regional and international interventions regarding the gravity of these moves from the Nusra Front and a number of other armed forces in north of Syria.
Now, what's your take on this offensive, on the timing of this offensive that coincided with distractions faced by Assad's allies? And how do you think it would influence the outcome of this conflict?
For sure, the timing is very important. This timing was not haphazard, and it was not by coincidence. This was very much calculated and very much studied by these factions and the supporters for these factions, especially that Hezbollah fighters were subjected to great blows in the south of Lebanon by Israel, and also the Iranian fighters and the Iranian presence in Syria has been targeted more than once by the Israeli occupation. So there is also an escalation from Israel against the agents of Iran in the region, and these fighters and these agents of Iran were part of the main forces that exist in the region and that has been helping the Syrian forces to control the areas in Aleppo, Idlib, Hama, and elsewhere. So the exit of such forces that are allied with Iran and those of Hezbollah from the equation, getting them out of the equation was one of the elements that encouraged these armed factions to speedily work and take the opportunity to put their control over vast areas. The very fast spread and the very fast occupation by these forces, by these groups to many cities means that the Syrian army was not well stationed in these areas, and the quick control by the extremist factions in the Syrian territories and in major cities like Aleppo. This is the second one in Syria. It shows the great role played by the Iran-backed militias and the Hezbollah forces. They were playing a major role in Syria, and with their retreat, these armed factions managed to speedily occupy and spread to great and big cities like Aleppo, which is very pivotal and very essential. And they are also moving towards Hama and moving also towards many other strategic points in the north of Syria.
Now, the Lebanese border has also seen increased tensions with Israeli airstrikes targeting Hezbollah infrastructure. Now, how might this interplay with this conflict in Aleppo?
For sure, the Israeli intervention and the Israeli continued bombardment, even after reaching or announcing a ceasefire or a truce between Lebanon and Israel, and pointing that there will be an Israeli withdrawal from the Lebanese territories within 60 days. When this happens, this might lead to more tension in the situation, especially with the attack by the groups on Aleppo, because Israel can find a justification for its intervention in the south of Lebanon or the north of Syria, believing that these areas might consider a danger to the Israeli interests, and maybe Israel will take the opportunity as well in order to achieve certain strategic objectives in these areas, especially that Israel has announced that it is targeting the military infrastructure of Hezbollah. It has bombarded certain axial points and fortifications of Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon, and it has also bombarded some areas of Hezbollah inside Syrian territories, and also the fighters of Iran inside the Syrian territories. So I wouldn't say that Israel would not expand. Israel can expand its attacks in the south of Lebanon and on the Syrian territories because of the confusion and the security vacuum that is associated with the moves of the armed militias and factions on the Syrian territories.
Now, regarding the humanitarian aspect, with over 500 million displaced individuals crossing into Syria from Lebanon, what immediate steps are needed to address this growing humanitarian crisis, and what should we be expecting at this upcoming stage?
Unfortunately, the humanitarian situation is the victim of the whole thing now, and it is one of the very deteriorating files with all the escalation on the ground, especially when the conflict is between militias and groups that are not usually committed to the parameters of international law, all the humanitarian elements in the international conventions. Of course, many of the displaced people in the north will be affected, and they might move towards the Turkish territories, and they might move to the inward of Syria. But in fact, the upcoming days will see more escalation, especially with the readiness of the Syrian army and its Russian allies to organize a counterattack. Such counterattack will definitely also have humanitarian consequences and will lead to more cutting of roads and more splitting areas from communication with the rest of the secure areas. So the humanitarian situation will be more escalated. What is needed now is to have a very vast humanitarian move through all the forces available on the ground, the US, Turkey, and the international and UN organizations who should be there in these areas to provide everything possible as aid to the displaced people. There should be safe corridors for the exit of the civilians from the areas that witness intensive fighting. There should also be a clear commitment from the fighting groups to the humanitarian parameters and humanitarian criteria. Unfortunately, the accumulated experiences that we have seen throughout the conflict on Syria will tell us that such commitment would not be respected by the fighting groups in many cases. And the civilians will pay the price because of this escalation and because of these military confrontations which are very violent and not recognizing at all the humanitarian laws or how to deal with the unarmed people.
Right, let me here ask you and reiterate the question, Dr. Osama. From your point of view, what should we be expecting at this upcoming stage, particularly with this resurgence of terrorist groups?
For sure, the open scenarios are all difficult. One of them is that war will return to vast areas in Syria, especially that these areas have witnessed a degree of stability and calm over the last 4 years. But yet, I believe now that the more possibility is for more fighting, more control of these militias over areas vast areas in Syria. Maybe the Syrian army and its allies try to use these areas as a target, but this would not be an easy job for the Syrian army. It will be fierce fighting, and it will be very strong battles.
Yes, Dr. Osama, if I may ask you here about the complexities in the Syrian situation, and how should the international community be putting that into considerations at this very critical stage the whole Middle East is passing by?
Unfortunately, the position of the international community is weak, and it's very lenient. And many of the international parties have neglected the Syrian file and lowered the importance of the Syrian file with regard to other files like Sudan and Gaza and other places that have been witnessing conflicts, and the Syrian file has been down in the interest of the international parties, and this enabled many parties to play hidden roles and other roles that are not favoring peace and stability. I believe that the resurgence of the armed militias and the extremist groups should be urging the international efforts to confront these elements and to confront these groups, especially that these groups are not only getting stationed in some areas. We need to remember what the ISIS did when they controlled the Mosul area in Iraq, and how ISIS expanded in many areas and threatened the security and interests of many countries in the region.
Indeed.
There should be a regional and international move, a quick one, so as things don't aggravate and such proliferation of the presence of these groups become. Maybe we need another alliance against terrorism like the one that was against ISIS in Iraq. But the complications of the Syrian situation might slow down the speedy reaction of the international reaction to this, especially that there is a lot of conflict of interests in Syria between regional and international parties that are not still settled about how to deal with the Syrian file and how to end this conflict and bring peace to Syria.